Good morning. Aren't ears amazing things? Today, mine were holding up my glasses, my mic, my mask. Like I only have two hands. If I didn't have my ears, I couldn't hold everything in place. Thank you, friends, this week for praying for those of us on staff who have been sick and are in the process of recovery. Continue to covet your prayers for us as we do that. For those of you who know, or those of you who don't know, my name's Pastor Wally. And friends, I am a sinner saved by grace, a saint imperfectly on my way with all my sin, with all my brokenness, becoming more and more like Jesus. And thankfully, I am not on my own. This is our path. This is all of our path with Jesus, especially as we embark on our series, Loving God, Loving People. Our listening and our learning process on gender, sexuality, and faith. And if you're coming into this series with the hope that I or Pastor Brad or one of our elders is going to definitively answer all your questions, or that you just need to sit back and be informed and wait for an outcome at the end of this 10-week series, then I have to say you are very mistakenly informed. We are in a process together, and it will require all of us to engage. Last week, Pastor Brad outlined what it is that we're attempting to do, and he listed 3 things, and each of these are going to require both individually and corporately our communal processing and application. And in ministry terms, we call it something very simple that you've probably heard before. We call it discipleship. It's our process of going further and further into our relationship with Jesus Christ to become more and more like Him. So to quickly recap those 3 things that Pastor Brad outlined last week, just as a reminder for us again today, 3 things. First, we're gaining clarity. Yes, we are staying within the outlined boundaries, beliefs of our confession of faith, our Mennonite Brethren confession of faith on marriage, singleness, sexuality, gender, all the other components of our confession, but there remain so many individual specific questions that have the scope or the potential to be messy, confusing, even divisive, and depending on who's asking them, depending on how they're being answered. And so our role, your role, is to engage, to dialogue, to discern, and to love as Jericho Ridge. Which brings us to the second thing we're doing, and that's building capacity for one another. How do we increase our capacity for one another? And by that, I don't just mean tolerance of one another. How do we increase our ability and our desire, our want to engage and to love one another amidst our diversity and our difference? That's one of the things that we're learning in the Colossian Way groups, which started last week. Some are starting this week. How to sit at the table with those who think differently than me. And you guys are engaging wonderfully. I just want to commend you and thank you as we did last week. Again, currently with leaders and participants, we have 107 of us involved in our Colossian Way groups, which is going to help us achieve, I think, our third goal in this process, which is developing unity. If you've been with Jericho Ridge for any length of time, you would know, or you probably experienced, that we've always had a breadth of diversity at Jericho Ridge in a variety of different ways, in a variety of different theological contexts. Friends, now is the time to take that which has sort of existed in different pockets and existed on the surface, and we need to take that diversity deeper and realize that we can and we have to bring our whole selves into this conversation and into our community. If we're going to grow more and more into the image of Jesus, we need to become vulnerable in the next now 9 weeks, and we need to do it within a safe and a cohesive people and place. If we're going to grow more and more into the likeness of Jesus, then I and you need to be able to bring our brokenness, our fears, our confusion, our questions, our beliefs, our convictions, all of it, and be loved and supported and challenged to be more like Jesus. So those are the three things that we're trying to achieve. As I describe that process and that begins to sink in, let me ask you an overarching question of the theme today. What scares you about that? What fear does that begin to surface within you? And if you're sitting there thinking to yourself, there is nothing that scares me about this. There is nothing that scares me about talking openly and vulnerably about gender and my sexuality and my faith with other people, then can I just say either you haven't given it any thought whatsoever and you haven't tuned into what I've been saying at all, or you're just lying to yourself. I said at the beginning that we are sinners saved by love and grace, imperfect saints on the way toward Jesus. Romans 3:23 reminds us that we are broken. Sin has broken it. Sin has broken all of us, and sin has broken all of us sexually. As sexual beings, we are not whole or perfect. As Bruce Miller points out in his book, the one that Pastor Brad mentioned that's available for you at the Welcome Center. He says on page 124, all of us who are past puberty have sinned sexually, at least in our imaginations and lusts. We are all broken. There are no sexually perfect people. We all live with sexual regret. And I would say that even more so than regret, always connected to brokenness are fears. Connected to brokenness are fears. We need to look no further than Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden after they ate the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. What did they do after they ate and God came looking for them? Genesis chapter 3, verses 9 and 10. What does Adam say? I heard you walking in the garden, and I was afraid of my nakedness, so I hid. They hid in the fear of their nakedness. They had never, ever, I think, experienced fear prior to that moment. They had never, ever experienced fear of their God, who had never given them a cause or a reason to be afraid. Their brokenness led them to be afraid of God. And so I think always connected to brokenness are fears. Last week, Pastor Brad talked openly about his personal sexual brokenness as a young man and the fear that he had about it coming to light at that time in his life as an active Christian. And I'm willing to guess from my conversations with him leading up to that message that those fears reared their ugly head at some point in some way again leading up to the message when he was going to share openly and vulnerably about that with us. You see, whenever we realize our brokenness, let alone share that with others, fear always lurks close by. And I just want to pause here and offer just a gentle trigger warning for you here in the room, for those of you online, as I talk more deeply about this. I'm going to talk more about my personal story. And one of the things that we're going to talk about is the idea that there is a brokenness of sin that we are complicit in, like Pastor Brad talked about last week. And there's also a fear that comes as a part of our brokenness where that sin has been perpetrated against us. And so as I talk more about my story of sexual abuse, if abuse is something that applies to you or applies to the circle of people that you live with, then I just want to bring this to your awareness of where I'm headed. In my very first message with Jericho Ridge back almost 7 years ago, back in the LEC, together with Sylvia, we shared part of our journey as you got to know us and we got to know you. And a key part of that message was being very open, very vulnerable about my mental health challenges, living with depression at the time, having a mental breakdown just a couple years earlier than that, and the onset of anxiety that created. And I did that because I wanted you, my new faith community at the time, to know who I was. What I didn't share in that message was the feelings of fear that I had in doing that with you? What if I couldn't do my job as a pastor anymore, coming out of what I had experienced? What if I had another breakdown months into this? What would that look like? What would you, as Jericho Ridge, maybe think about me and my mental health challenges, my mental illness? Would you maybe want me to not talk about that very much? Maybe not mention it? Maybe not be sort of a broken pastor? Like, who wants that? And then there was the fear of, what if I wasn't done my healing journey yet? What else could potentially come down that road as I continued on with my counselor? It's amazing how brokenness can create so many fears within our heads. And I'm not a psychologist, but I do believe strongly, as I said, there is a link between our brokenness and our fears, between that chasm of what happens in the darkness of our lives and bringing that into the light, that in the middle of there's this ugly, nasty thing called fear. And friends, that fear is not from God. That fear is not put there by Jesus. Fear is not a part of who God is. One of the most repeated refrains in the scriptures when God introduces himself into situations and people is, do not be afraid. Here I am. Do not be afraid. Fear is not a characteristic of God because fear has its origin in brokenness, and God is not broken in any manner. God is fully whole, fully holy. God is love according to 1 John 4:16, and perfect love according to verse 18 has no fear because perfect love casts out. Perfect love expels. Perfect love removes all fear. Now you might be thinking, what about healthy fear? Even when we talk about healthy fear, that's something necessary to protect us in a world that is broken. We need that here to protect us from something that inevitably can harm us. But in the future, when God is fully and wholly present and comes and redeems what is broken in our created order, there will be no need for healthy fear. You will not be in heaven, or you will not be fully in God's presence and need to have a healthy fear, because there will be nothing of God that will instill fear within you. Brokenness will be fully removed, and so will all fear, including healthy fear. Our fears in this life exist because we are not yet whole in our likeness of Jesus, and God's perfect love has not yet been fully realized by us in this existence. So what do we do with our fears? We begin with a look into our personal brokenness. We uncover, we identify, we examine, we wrestle with our sin and our brokenness. We name it and we aim to bring healing to it. And almost always we will need the help, friends, of others to do this. We are, after all, created as relational beings. We need one another. We are relational beings in the image of God. And for me, that means talking with self. I love what Paul Tripp says. He says, you are the most influential person to yourself because you are constantly talking to yourself. You are constantly evaluating. You are constantly critiquing yourself. You are constantly wondering about the future and how you can figure out. Your brain is constantly talking to yourself. For me, it means talking with loved ones. It means talking with confidence, such as counselors or accountability partners, spiritual directors. It means talking with my faith community, not just from up here, but in smaller circles as well. If we go back to my first message with Jericho 7 years ago and sharing my mental health brokenness journey, at that time I thought that I had really done all the heavy lifting of my healing journey in counseling. Someone chuckled up here. It was a wise chuckle. After all, for those of you who know my story, I had gone from clinically disassociating the trauma that had happened to me as a young boy to having an awareness and even an acceptance that, yes, actually, this did happen to me. And it did shape who I am. And it was such a positive experience in the counseling. It was hard. It was challenging. It was all sorts of heavy emotional aspects to it. But in the end, it was a positive aspect. And it caused me to realize that I actually wanted to be more so with my counselor. I wanted to learn even more so with the help of someone else who I was, who I am. And eventually, in that process, as I continued on with my counselor, I was freed from depression. I had lived 40 plus years with depression. Now with the help of my counselor, please hear these words, with the help of my counselor and the help of my GP, I was able to come off of antidepressants. I was able to walk with my care team and be alleviated of antidepressants. Now I'm still on medication. I'm on medication for the anxiety that reared its ugly head during that process, and for whatever reason, I don't know that reason yet. But together again with my counselor and my GP, I've learned how to cope with that. I've learned how to manage that aspect of anxiety. And so let me just reiterate, you've probably heard me say this before, let me just reiterate, we are created mentally, physically, spiritually beings within the context of being relational. And so that means that we need to care for ourselves in all of those different aspects. And so you need a care team around you. I don't care if you're 20 and you think you can conquer the world, you need a care team around you. Put it in place now. I don't care if you're 60 and you think I've got my whole life on my own, I'm doing fantastic. You need a care team around you. And you need people around you in each one of those specific areas. That's, for example, why I have my general practitioner who I've been with for over 20 years, person of faith, person that I can trust and talk to on a regular basis if I need to about my physical health, someone that I trust. That's why I still see my counselor today on a regular basis, so that the mental aspect, sometimes I'll walk in there and she's like, so what are we going to talk about? I said, I don't know. I feel really good. I feel like I'm paying you for nothing today. And then we'll start talking and I'll realize, oh, because the one thing I do before I go into every counseling session is pray, Lord, what do you have for me today? And I come out and I'm like, oh, that's what you had for me today. And so I meet with my counselor. I meet regularly with my spiritual director. And I meet regularly within a faith circle so that I have that relational component covered. You cannot go through life in a healthy manner without attending regularly to your entire being, because every one of those pieces interacts with the other piece. And so if you're physically ailing, it's going to affect you mentally, it's going to affect you spiritually. If you're spiritually vibrant and well, it's going to affect you physically, mentally, and you get the idea. Back to my story. With my depression largely healed and anxiety relatively manageable, I again thought at that point, 6-7 years ago, that yeah, I'm healed. I'm done with that part of my healing journey. But like I said, I pressed on with my counselor. And one of the things that we began to realize, because this was a newer counselor with me, wasn't the trauma counselor that I had engaged with early on, is that I had never fully pieced together that day. I had never really probed into and brought healing to the initial source of my brokenness, which had a strong overarching sexual component to it. And I said earlier that we can all be broken in two ways. Sin that we perpetrate and are complicit in. We're all sinners, actively sinners. And then there's sin that others perpetrate against us. We all live in a broken world with other sinners who will sin against us. And when it comes to our sexuality, both those components are often true. There's sexual sin that I have been, that I'm complicit in, that hurts myself and ripples out and hurts others as a result. This part of my story, however, deals with the sin, the brokenness caused by someone else. Someone else sexually offending against me, bringing abuse against me. At age 7, some of you will remember that story that I've shared, and I've shared different snippets of it throughout the time. I won't go into all of it. We don't have time. But at age 7 in some, I was abducted for one day. I was sexually abused. In that time, I was released, thankfully. But then I clinically disassociated from that event within a heartbeat. My first words after being released, within my own head and out loud, I vividly remember, can never tell anybody anything about this. Never. That was the last threat given to me, conditional on my release. Of course, the big breakthrough 40 years later, after my mental breakdown, was rediscovering, remembering that traumatic event really did happen. It's amazing what your brain can do. It can actually literally remove, hide, cover, I don't know what the technical term is other than disassociate, and make it as if it's never happened. Never happened. To the point that later on in life when you have little flashbacks, little memories, maybe a dream, you convince yourself that that never happened. That's just something out there. It never took place. But several years ago, as I pressed in once again with my counselor, I realized, I knew at this point that that had happened. I was past that place. But now I realized I still had very distinct blank spots of that day. And a long story short, it wasn't actually until last June of 2022, that I had full memory of that day. That all the blank spots, as difficult, as challenging, as ugly as they were, all those spots now are in my memory. And they were the hardest blank spots to fill in because they were the worst sexual crimes against me. My trauma, my fears had completely blinded me, friends, from being able to go there and to be able to go into that place with those images and those memories. And yes, at first I disassociated from that entire event, and then I kept blackout points or blocked out points of that specific day. The brokenness caused by someone else was so overwhelming that as a 7-year-old, I had to survive by making it all disappear. And if you're wondering, how did I keep that from my parents? You can come and talk to me and I'll unfold that day for you. I'll share that with you. But it came quite naturally, actually. In that moment, I couldn't flight. I couldn't run away. I couldn't fight. As a 7-year-old, I couldn't fight against a grown-up. And so my being had to freeze, had to disassociate. My brokenness, that which was perpetrated against me, was creating such a fear that it radically shaped the trajectory of my life for 40 years, including as a sexual being, including the sexuality that I was created with. And friends, even now in sharing this part about my brokenness, which contributed to other parts of my sexual brokenness as an adult, even in this moment, fear is actually rising up. Fear was rising up in the leading up to the message, wanting to shut the conversation down. If you knew the details of that day, what would you think of me? What would you think of me? I have never shared the details of that day with anyone else other than my counselor. And a big reason for that, one is my personal choice, but two is the fear of what would you think about me? How would you look at me differently? If you knew the full extent of my sexual brokenness, fear can be so overwhelming that it redirects our course, that it changes what we would normally do. So what's allowing me to stand here? Like, why bother with sharing all this stuff? Why bringing tears and memories? And how can I stand here as a sexually broken person being vulnerable, which is what we're asking each other to do, before you with the fear combating against me? How does that happen? Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. I am here. My perfect love expels fear. In my sessions with my counselor, with my spiritual director, I discovered something in addition to the trauma and the pain. I discovered, and God graciously, I'm a visual person, God graciously has given me very clear, vivid images of these things. That Jesus was with me in those very, very moments. That in the place of my greatest brokenness and pain, I can picture where Jesus is in there. I can picture how he was covering me. I can picture how he was walking me through that and out of that place. And you may find that hard to believe, but for me, friends, it's become a lifeline. Jesus present in my most heinous moments. Jesus present in my most significant crises. Jesus present. That in my greatest brokenness, sexual trauma that sent me down a challenging, sometimes ugly, painful course, rippling into the lives of those around me, even in that brokenness, Jesus was present. Do not be afraid. My grace overflows for you. My love for you is stronger than your fear. Do not be afraid. I am here with you. And now I'm learning that in my sexual brokenness and in the broader extent of my personal brokenness, how my personal being as a sinner, whether it's my doing or whether it's perpetrated against me, Jesus is present because he doesn't want or intend the brokenness to lead to fear. He doesn't want it to lead to a fear that shuts us down or that causes us to run in a direction that he doesn't intend for us to run. He doesn't want us to go into places of unhealth that lead to the inability of us to follow him and to become more and more like him. Because that's what our fears do. Our fears don't lead us toward God. Our fears lead us away. That's what Satan intends in that moment, in that chasm of things that exist in the darkness and things that are trying to be brought into the light. Satan doesn't want those things to come into the light. The darkness is his playground. And so there's this massive chasm sometimes for us. And in there, as we're trying to bring things into the light where Jesus is, Satan places this incredible thing called fear and says, "Are you an idiot? Why would you ever go this way? Stay where you are." And he does it with fear to keep us in our brokenness. Jesus, on the other hand, Jesus, the light, intends for us to find him in our brokenness. He doesn't intend for us to remain in places of darkness or unhealth that lead to fear, particularly fear of identity. Who am I? Or fear of who others might think I am. John 10:10 says, Jesus says, that he is present so that we can have life and have it to the full. Not so that we can disassociate some places, not so that we can compartmentalize some places and say that Jesus never gets to go there or Jesus never was there. No, he says that you might have it to the full, that you might have wholeness. And that means finding Jesus in every aspect of your life, in every place, in every space, in every piece of brokenness, and in every fear. Friends, if we're honest with ourselves, fear has the potential to be a driver in some way for each of us in this listening and learning process on sexuality. And we need to be able to identify our fears so that it doesn't immobilize us into a state of unhealth that causes us to hide from or run away from or lash out at each other. God doesn't intend for us to operate out of any fear in this process with each other. God's goal is always to grow us more and more into the likeness of Jesus within the context of his love. His goal is always to grow us together more and more into the likeness of Jesus within the context of his love. And in this conversation, I believe that it starts with us doing the hard work of first accepting our brokenness, identifying those subsequent fears that we carry. What am I scared of when it comes to talking about sexuality and faith? Not just what am I scared of talking about that sexuality and faith, or listening to that person talk about their sexuality and faith. What am I scared of talking about my sexuality and faith? What am I scared it will reveal about me? What am I scared that it's going to reveal about you as you respond to me? What am I scared that it's going to reveal about faith and about God? Where am I scared that I'm going to find myself? And what if Jesus isn't there? As we started this process back in the fall, a number of you have engaged me on different topics and conversations. And you wanted to know what I believed on a specific scenario or a certain issue or how to handle something. And at times, I have been purposefully vague and not told you exactly what I believe. And it's not because I don't have deep convictions. It's not because I'm going outside of our MB confession of faith. It's not because I'm tossing aside the Bible or going down some slippery slope. It's because I wanted to challenge you to go deeper personally within yourself first. Introspection before declaration. My fear in this process is not, friends, that we will go down some slippery slope or that will be so doctrinally bound or dogmatic that we're going to alienate and hurt an entire portion of the population. I have too much faith in our elders, in our leadership team, for either of those things to happen. My fear is that fear will drive the process. And that unknowingly we will give Satan an open door to corporately stir up confusion, anger, division within us because we haven't done the hard work on a personal level first. My fear is that we'll miss the opportunity to find Jesus in those hard, challenging, fearful places. That we'll miss the opportunity to be changed more into his likeness, and that's going to affect us corporately as a church. This conversation does not scare Jesus one bit. This conversation doesn't even stir the slightest bit of angst within him. Jesus is light shining into our darkness whenever we let him. But the darkness isn't the conversation. It's our inattentiveness to our brokenness and the fears that come out of that, which have the capacity to set us on a course that blinds us from where Jesus wants us to go. So friend, if you haven't already, please take time to search out personally the fears that you bring into the conversation. Go back to that first question, what scares you? And think about it, ponder it. Ask the Spirit to speak to you. Examine your own brokenness, your own sexual brokenness, and the resulting fears that come from that. And acknowledge they are not from God. But don't just stop there. Then ask, then seek, then knock to find Jesus right in those spaces. Don't assume that he's not there, because he is there. Don't fight. Don't flight. Don't freeze in those places. Rather, hear the voice. And sometimes it's so quiet, but hear the voice. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. I am here. And if at all possible, can I encourage you, don't do it alone. You need other people, your family, your spouse, your faith community. The Colossian Way groups will help facilitate some of that. You need your care team. Part of that care team should be counselors. You think, I don't need a counselor. I've never needed a counselor. I can't afford it. Try it. On the seat beside you or underneath you, some of you are sitting on it right now and you're not even aware, there's a piece of paper with a list of counselors. Take it and invest in yourself. if you don't have someone as a part of your care team who takes care of you mentally, emotionally, this is your opportunity. With whomever you decide that is safe and loving, just do it. Don't let the fears of your brokenness prescribe and guide the course of your dialogue, of your thought process in the listening and learning process that we are involved in. That, my brothers and sisters, is the role of Jesus. Light shining into our darkness. God, perfect love, expelling, casting out all our fears, making us more and more into the likeness of Jesus so that we will pursue him all the more and be driven and guided all the more, no matter what the next conversation is, no matter what the next aspect of our brokenness is about. Remember, the big part about becoming more and more into the likeness of Jesus is that we have to become less and less like our brokenness. And to be able to do that, we have to identify those places. And we have to meet Jesus in those places. And invite the worship team to come on up. They're going to lead us in a time of singing and response. One of the things that we'll have available is part of our leadership team at the back to be able to pray with you. Today, those people are Pastor Brad, Miriam Falks, Dale Moore, Pastor Jenna. If you just want to start the process with someone, start the conversation with someone, if you just want to say, would you just pray for me to help me start, then these are the people that are available for you at the back. And if you're online viewing with us, then you can reach out at prayer@jerichoridge.com, and our team will get in touch with you as well. We'll respond to you. So friends, whatever posture that you need to take going into our time of singing, whether that's standing, whether that's kneeling, whether that's going to the back, whether that's heading off to the side, there's a quiet room off to the side that you can use to reflect and to think and to pray. We invite you to do that here. I know that Jared's probably going to say, let's stand together, which just goes against what I just said. You can do whatever you'd like to do. It's common for us to stand and worship, so if you would like to stand, please stand with our worship team, and let's respond to Jesus.
Feel every freedom to stand. I also sense that for a lot of us, we just need some breathing space. And if that means nothing's coming out of your mouth, that's okay. That's okay. God hears your heart. And he's sitting with you, he's standing with you, he walks beside you.
Hear the voice of one that's calling. There's a chair that waits for you, and a friend who understands everything you're going through. But you keep standing at a distance in the shadows of your shame. But there's a light of hope that's shining. Won't you come and take your place? So bring it all to the table. It's something he ain't seen before. For all your sin, all your sorrow and your sadness, there's a Savior and he calls. Bring it all to the table. He can see the weight you carry and the fears that hold your heart. Through the cross you've been forgiven, you're accepted as you are. So bring it all to the table. It's nothing he ain't seen before. For all your trials, all your worries and your burdens, there's the Savior and he calls. Bring it all to the table. Come on in, take your place. There's no one who's turned away. All you sinners, all you saints, come right in and find your grace. Come on in, take your place. There's no one who's turned away. All you sinners, all you saints, come on in and find your grace. So bring it all to the table. It's nothing he ain't seen before. For all your trials, all your worries and your burdens, there's a Savior and he calls. Bring it all to the table. Bring it all to the table.
There's not a one person that God does not welcome. In whatever state we are, the invitation is always to come as we are and to ask God to do his work in us. There's a whole list of people that's going to be sung about here. I just invite you, if there's an adjective here that resonates with you, just offer that to God. Say, this is how I'm coming to you right now. That's the only way you can come. Helpless, all secure, all hopeful and all broken, all thankless and all poor, all peaceful and all violent, all fearless, all afraid, all angry, all rejoicing, all doubting, all assured, all joyful and all mourning. Come gaze upon his glory. Come receive his love and mercy. His grace declares his glory. You are loved forever, holy. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name. I need thee. Every hour I need thee. Oh, bless me now, my Savior. I come to thee. I need thee. Oh, I need thee. Every hour I need thee. Oh, bless me now, my Savior. I come to thee. I need thee every hour, most gracious Lord. No tender voice like thine can peace afford. I need thee, oh, I need thee. Every hour I need thee. Oh, bless me now, my Savior. I come to thee. I need thee every hour. Stay thou nearby. Temptations lose their power when thou art nigh. I need thee, oh, I need thee. Every hour I need thee. Oh, bless me now, my Savior. I come to thee. I need thee every hour. Enjoy your pain. Come quickly and abide, or life is vain. I need thee, oh, I need thee. Every hour I need thee. Oh, bless me now, my Savior. I come to thee. I need thee, oh, I need thee. Every hour I need thee. Oh, bless me now, my Savior. I come to thee. Verse 2 of this song says, shame no longer has a place to hide. And what's brought out into the light, we sense exposure, we sense vulnerability, we sense risk. Ultimately, we sense what the Apostle Paul says when he says, perfect love casts out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. We're worried we're going to be found out because we're worried everything's going to change and it's not going to be good. So if there's a step you need to take today just to reach out, to call Satan's bluff, say, no, I'm not buying that. I'm not going to hide. I trust this is a space that you can do that, or you'll be bold and you'll find a space where you can do that. Perfect love casts out fear. Let's sing together. When darkness tries to roll over my bones, when sorrow comes to steal the joy I own, when brokenness and pain is all I know, I won't be shaken, I won't be shaken. my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Shame no longer has a place to hide. I'm no longer captive to the lie. No, I'm not afraid to leave my past behind. I won't be shaken. I won't be shaken. Oh, my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. There is power that can break off every chain. There's power that can empty out a grave. There is resurrection power that can save. There's power in your name, power in your name. There is power that can break off every chain. There's power that can empty out a grave. There is resurrection power that can save. There's power in your name, power in your name. Oh, my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Oh, my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love.
Oh, the joy of ears. Now they're all. Well, that is a wonderful truth. And for some of us today, we're going to need to take some time this afternoon and in the week ahead to stand in God's love and to just rest there. So I invite you this afternoon, you know, parents, if you're picking up your kids after the service here, you know that within an instant they can take you into a whirlwind of life and change your direction. It's okay to put on an extra show for them this afternoon, to let them be babysat with a video, whatever the case may be. Call up a friend and say, can you take my kids? For some of us, you're thinking already, I need to get right back to work or whatever the case may be. So yes, Michael, you can even leave early. But we're going to need to take opportunity for some just to rest and stand. Be kind and gracious to yourself today. I know that I will need that space. Some of you are going to need that space. So take that time, and it might come later in the week. Just be attentive to that and take time to stand in God's love for you. Bye, Michael. Okay. I'll be here. So we want to send you out this morning with a benediction from 1 Peter's writings. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. For you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood. You are a holy nation, God's special possession. Some verses say God's masterpiece, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness and into his incredible light. Amen.